and gentlemen, please take your seats. We're about to start. We're having a connection problem with Professor Jeffrey Sachs, who's joining us on Zoom. And so we are going to move on in our agenda. It is my big pleasure, many bigs, to welcome the former Prime Minister of Sweden, His Excellency Stefan Löfven. I had the pleasure and honor of meeting him last year, actually. It was in Delphi in Greece, and we were on a session together, and he said great things, so I insisted that he has to come to Egypt, talk to us about his readings of the present situation, of what's happening globally, and also very important to visit the Grand Museum. Extremely important. So please welcome His Excellency Stefan Löfven.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, it's a true honor for me to address you here today on an important topic during an important event. If I can wish what I want you to remember after my intervention, it is three things. First, the sincerity about the world being in a very bad place. Second, the urging of changing several false narratives that the world is guided by in our time. And the third is the exhortation of gathering all forces that believes in democracy and multilateralism. My basic philosophy is that mankind can embark on another and brighter path than the current one. And Robert F. Kennedy Sr. long ago formulated this so wise, and I quote, "The future is not a gift, it's an achievement. Every generation helps make its own future. This is the essential challenge of the present," end of quote. And to achieve what we want requires also that we can see reality as it is, without embellishment. So I will divide my speech into three parts. First, I will talk about some of the challenges and threats we are facing today. In this well-informed assembly, it's virtually unnecessary to list the world's problems and challenges, but I will mention some, as I want them also to be reflected in the false narratives and images of reality that deceives so many into choosing the wrong path. Then I will talk about the necessary change of some narratives and dominating policies that are shaping the current difficult situation. And lastly, I want to describe some of the multilateral processes that I believe could contribute to a positive change. Regarding threats and challenges, let's start with the sad fact that wars and conflicts are increasing dramatically. Here at the African continent alone, Geneva Academy informs us that there are 35 ongoing armed conflicts. Around the world, there are a total of more than 100 armed conflicts. The vast majority are civil wars and terrorist insurgency inside a country, but still, of course, killing a lot of people. But wars and conflicts between nations often occurs when leaders believe that the only security is based on deterrence, weapons, and military force. Now, I fully understand the need to defend a territory that is challenged with force by a foreign power. Being a European, I unreserved support the military defending of Ukraine. This is absolutely needed here and now. Consequently, the same applies, of course, to that kind of situations in other parts of the world. But the world has now, for the 10th consecutive year, witnessed an increase in military spending, which now has reached $2.718 trillion US. That is an increase by almost 40% between 2014 and 2024. So we are right now on a path of eternal arms race, and that is, of course, not sustainable. Another threat to mankind and our planet is the climate change. One could think that with all the evidence of going in the wrong direction too fast regarding emissions and warming, we could agree that we need to change the course, but that is, sadly enough, not the case. Too many, not least leaders, doubt or deny the warming itself, although we already have passed 1.5 degrees. It could start thinking what happens if we reach 2, 2.5, 3. Leaders also doubt or deny what warming already causes and will cause if it continues. The proofs are already here. Drought, like the African Horn 2020 to 2022. Flooding, also African Horn 2023 and 2024. Hurricanes. In Europe, have already seen both extreme warm weather and flooding. And Europe should worry about what happens if the Gulf Stream collapses. Friends, another fundamental threat is that we have seen 25 years of a backsliding democracy. The world actually now has fewer democracies than autocracies for the first time in 20 years. Liberal democracies are now the least common regime, only 29 in the world. Freedom of expression is decreasing in 44 countries. Now, many more sad facts could be added to this dark list. Autocratic leaders are using democracy to reach power so that they can change the rules and stay in power. Weaken democracy. That's the name of the game. The rule of law is an obstacle to doing what they want, be it Trump, Putin, Orban, Milei, or anyone of the kind. My fourth and last serious challenge is the decreased multilateral cooperation. In a time in which we experience serious challenges that won't be solved by any nation alone, but on the contrary must be solved in international cooperation, world leaders tend to turn inwards and decrease time and resources for multilateral cooperation. It appears as if national leaders' safe ground is to tell the population that we are taking care of our country by simply putting it first as the most important. Make America great again, probably being the most known, but far from the only expression of this kind. In our complex world, leaders have tried to make it less complex by narrowing down the perspectives of how to deal with this reality. So, dear friends, I've chosen 4 challenges. Could go on, of course, talking about AI, space, diseases, child labor, you name it. But there's not enough time, and the ones I've chosen is probably enough to digest under these 30 minutes. Now, I will instead proceed with narratives that I believe must change. The first narrative we need to reconsider is the claim that the world doesn't have enough financial resources to do what is necessary. I say that is false. And let me give you some examples. The world's total financial resources are around $450 trillion US. If we just count the 5 richest alone, the 5 richest people, they have accumulated assets of $1 trillion US, 1,000 billion US dollars, 5 people. This is, to me, a clear example of the absurd inequality regarding financial resources. Another example The total subsidies of fossil fuel adds up to around 5, 6, 7 trillion US dollars per year. The needed amount to realize the Sustainable Development Goals is about the same, 5, 6, 7 trillion US dollars annually. Now, this is an obvious example of an absurd use of financial resources. We allocate so much money in emissions that is threatening the planet and at the same time claiming that we haven't got enough to save it. Now let's change that and state once and for all, we do have enough finances. We can combine public and private money to get what we need for investments in climate, in environment, in biodiversity. And that is also going to make the world economy stronger. The second narrative that needs to be altered is the one believing that the world's wealth is a zero-sum game. That if another country gains something, developing its wealth, the others lose. And that thinking is the danger behind conflicts, and it is just not right. We are all around the world so dependent on one another. Manufacturing of both goods and services are so interlinked in production chains around the world. During the fight against the pandemic, vaccines were manufactured by putting together substances that could come from 10, 15 different locations in different parts of the world. My point is this: if we made sure that the richer part of the world increases its investment in the poorer part of the world, it would be good for people raising from poverty, it's good for their countries, and it would be good for the rest of the world because more people could take part in a world economy. That benefits us all. It's a win-win, not a zero-sum. But today we are in some sense moving in a totally different direction. Several countries now in the so-called developed world is decreasing its official development assistance, the ODA. And I am convinced that it is a mistake for many reasons, not least morally and economically. It widens the inequality in the world. And then the richer part, the richer countries wonder why poorer countries don't trust them. I think it's quite obvious why. The third narrative I want to challenge is the one claiming that there is no climate problem, so we don't have to act. And if there is a need for change, it's so difficult, it's so expensive, so people refuse it. Now, first, I, for one, trust more than 3,000 scientists from all over the world, so much more than populists and deniers, including occasional so-called leaders. And to those who say they don't know what to believe, I say, are you ready to take that risk? But also remind people that with the climate change, with the warming, comes the real price, the highest cost. One obvious example being the insecurity of food production. Now, the logical conclusion of the situation is that we just can't accept a warming that endangers our planet. So we need a combination of, on the one hand, a firm last date for net zero emissions, and on the other hand, on our way going there, we have to develop technologies, a strategy for developing new technologies. With new technologies comes the future jobs, and with the future jobs comes the new future welfare. So we're simply using the fight against dangerous climate change to build a better society. The crucial perspective is to leave no one behind, but to reassure people that we will help one another so that we can feel as safe as possible during this absolutely necessary transition. The necessary change will be positive because we are doing something good for our own generation, and we'll leave something good for the generation after us. We can achieve this only in true multilateral cooperation. We can see courage and strength by projecting how children and future generations one day will judge us, because they will. I don't want them to say that we didn't even understand what was happening, so that's why we didn't act. I don't want them to say that we did understand, but chose anyway not to act accordingly. I want them to say, well, it was close to a disaster, but finally they both understood and acted accordingly. Thank you. The fourth narrative that needs to be changed is the one claiming that the only security is military force and weapons. My objection is that this is not building long-term safety. On the contrary. The world needs another trajectory, and that is towards what was more than 40 years ago named common security from a United Nations report in 1982. Common security is a concept based on the simple, clear convictions that nations are safer if their neighbors are safer. So instead of focusing on how to constantly build up an ever-increasing military force, nations should allocate more resources towards measures to assure one another safety. That is sustainable security. And the ultimate insecurity is nuclear weapons. Paradoxically, one of the most successful discoveries from a strict scientific perspective, splitting and fusing atoms, became the most dangerous threat to mankind. And Robert Oppenheimer, director of the Manhattan Project that resulted in the first nuclear weapons, said, after watching the result of the atom bombs, I have become death. The security concept for nuclear weapons is absurdly named mutually assured destruction. So our security is that nuclear weapon nations can destroy each other. But the fact is that a nuclear war will destroy the world. That is why the abbreviation of mutual assured destruction, MAD, is so suitable. Already Ronald Reagan and Mikhail Gorbachev stated that, and I quote, "A nuclear war cannot be won, should not be fought." And that has recently been repeated by leaders of all 5 permanent members of the Security Council. And yet now we witness new increase of nuclear weapons in the world. It's time for the world for a totally different concept, mutually assured survival, and get rid of nuclear weapons at the latest at 2045, 100 years after the tragedies in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. 1 century of madness is enough. Yet another narrative, number 5, is that we are also experiencing a challenging of democracy. It is seen in several forms, but it always results in a belief that a strong person, of course a man, can make things work much more efficiently. That is, of course, not true, unless we accept that a few is always right, so we don't need the time to find the solutions that a majority believes in. I don't accept that way of thinking. My years in leading positions taught me that taking time for democracy ends up in better decisions because different perspectives have been heard. It has also taught me that decisions are easier to implement after a democratic process because more people understand what is happening. They have been part of this process. But for me, this is also a deep moral issue. All over the world, democracies have been built by the hands of the people, many of them putting their own life on the line. Citizens know that only through democracy can they be respected and equal. Citizens fought for it because they knew that democracy is a system where power belongs to the people. It is not a stage for a strongman to dominate. It is a shared foundation where no one stands above the rest. It's a principle where the division of power is not seen as a weakness, but as a guarantee that no individual can override the rights of the people. True democracy is a promise that every voice counts, every institution remains free, and every person has a stake in shaping their future. Only democracy can citizens be truly free. Number 6, on the last narrative I want to challenge, is the growing belief in nationalism and that multilateralism is not so rewarding for individual countries. Now, trying to deal with global complexity by limiting the field of view to my own country, my own region, is wrong. It is making it more complex because it adds to the problem. What would be the appropriate strategy is to bring clarity in communication with people, namely that the country's best path forward is to combine the national perspective with the international and multilateral perspective. So the message to the people should be, I'm doing the utmost for our country, and a crucial part of that is cooperating with the surrounding world. That is in our best interest. The ultimate scenario would, of course, be people demanding their leaders to act also on the global arena. Dear friends, I've so far described several threats, challenges, and that we need to replace some false narratives. Now I'm moving to the last part, some of the processes in the multilateral system that can be an important part of the solution if we take active part in them. Hopefully we can do that by, at the same time, developing the multilateral system. My key message here is that we need stable structures for multilateral cooperation. We need our United Nations. The former Secretary General of the United Nations, Dag Hammarskjöld, he once said, and I quote, "The United Nations was not created to bring humanity to heaven, but to save us from hell." End of quote. As in all organizations, it is ultimately the members that decides the strength and the functioning. In the case of the United Nations, there is not least a need for development and change. By just preserving it, we will only weaken it even more. And unfortunately, too many leaders see the weakening of the United Nations as an opportunity for them to gain from that. But we can see some positive change, and we need to see this. One started when the General Assembly, celebrating UN's 75 years in 2020, the call on the Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, to deliver a strategy how to develop UN's ability and capability. And the Secretary General returned to the General Assembly 1 year after with a document titled Our Common Agenda. The crucial conclusion the Secretary General drew was this, and I quote again, "The choices we make or fail to make today could result in the breakdown or a breakthrough to a greener, better, safer future. The choice is ours to make." End of quote. After that, several processes on different topics started, ending up with the General Assembly deciding in September last year on an international agreement with the title, A Pact for the Future. I had the opportunity of taking part in one of the processes leading up to the pact, Together with the former President of Liberia, Madam Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, I co-chaired a high-level advisory board on effective multilateralism. We used the Secretary General's challenging choice of breakdown or breakthrough and decided to title our report A Breakthrough for People and Planet. Given the limited time we had for our work, we prioritized 6 subjects that was important. First, building trust in multilateralism. We believe that more trust is built by more inclusion. So if, for example, women, young people are better included, that will build trust. The same goes for civil society, the private sector, local communities. Second, making the relevant and correct choices for both planet and people. And that is a choice regarding environment, climate, biodiversity. For us, it means to choose net zero greenhouse gas emissions and phasing out fossil fuel. Third, changing the multilateral financial architecture. I'm talking about the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, the regional development banks, the private actors, meaning first, increase democracy in that system, increasing the developing world's saying in decision-making, but also increasing available finances by using public finances to de-risk investments and thus attracting much more of all the private money I mentioned earlier into necessary investments. Also, the IMF can already now allocate more of its reserves, the so-called special drawing rights. Instead of, again, the developed countries benefiting most of these reserves, it can be more directed to developing countries. Yet another task the financial system needs to improve is to handle debt crisis. More than 50 countries in the world are in serious debt situation. More than 3 billion people on our planet live in a country that must spend more on interest than on health and education, a fact that says it all. And lastly, regarding the financial system, it must improve its ability to handle financial crisis. That means detecting crisis earlier, but also acting swifter and more resolutely. The fourth area we discussed was that the world needs a just digital transition. And that requires that all countries have access to technology, infrastructure, but also, not least, data. And let us make sure that there is no digital illiteracy. The fifth area was that the high-level advisory board concluded that it is time for equitable, effective, collective security arrangement. That means using what I mentioned regarding narratives instead of trying to build security on threatening each other. We should build security on showing our neighboring countries, we want you well. The last topic we wrote about is the need of strengthening global governance for current and emerging transnational risks. That includes earlier detecting, but also forming a body of people with relevant mandates to act as early as possible if a crisis that has not been foreseen arises. Now, the Pact for the Future, with its flaws, with its shortcomings, offers a structure, a handrail for us to advance our multilateral cooperation. Now, that pact needs to be followed up, needs to be implemented. So here comes one common responsibility for the world community, including us here at this forum. How do we support that development the best way we can? One example, in early July this year in Seville, in Spain, the world came together to discuss specifically how to develop the global financial system and make it work in line with the decided Sustainable Development Goals. As I said earlier, it is not the volume of financial resources that is a problem, it is the distribution and how it is used. Dear friends, to sum up, the world is in a bad place, but it has been so also before our time, and we know it can be changed. It's only by facing reality as it is that we also can change the direction. It's also by sometimes questioning the dominating narratives that we can bring ourselves to think in other perspectives and getting a chance to come up with new solutions. And it is by taking our own responsibility, acting together with the insight that multilateral problems and challenges requires multilateral solutions. For many people, I think Nelson Mandela is a symbol of genuine leadership. When we, in our time, worry about the problems we are facing and sometimes even doubt our ability to solve them, let us be guided by his words. It always seems impossible until it's done. Thank you very much for listening.